There are nights born with the destiny to shatter normality. Nights when the veils separating our world from a vaster, more incomprehensible universe becomes dangerously thin. The early morning of December 20th, 1958 in Sweden was one of those nights. For two men, Hans Gustafsson and Stig Rydberg, the drive home after a party should have been just another routine trip, lulled by the silence of the road and the biting cold of the Scandinavian winter. But a strange light, a luminous wound pulsing in the darkness of the forest, would divert them from their destiny forever. What they found in that clearing was not just an unknown object, but a violation of every law of nature they knew. They would be touched, attacked, and tested by an intelligence that did not belong to this world. This is not just a story of a sighting. It is the chronicle of a confrontation, of a desperate struggle for reality itself, and of a secret so traumatic it was almost buried forever under the weight of ridicule and official denial. This is the Domsten Case. It was 3 a.m. The road connecting Vikennes to Domsten was a dark and lonely ribbon, flanked by trees that seemed like guardians of ancient secrets. Inside the car, 25-year-old Hans and 30-year-old Stig felt the pleasant fatigue of a night of celebration, but their drowsiness vanished instantly when through a gap in the dense vegetation they saw it. It wasn't the light of a car headlight, nor the glow of a country house. It was an anomalous, constant, and silent luminescence that bathed a patch of the forest in a glow that seemed cold, dead. Curiosity, a human force as powerful as fear, took control. They stopped the car. Every step into the woods was a break in the silence. The snow crunched under their boots, the frigid air burning their lungs. And then, after about 30 feet, the forest opened up and they saw the source of the light. Resting on three metallic legs that dug into the frozen ground was a disc-shaped object. At 13 to 16 feet in diameter, it wasn't immense, but its presence was overwhelming. It shone, but didn't blind. It radiated light, but not heat. In the center, a darker spot, like a closed eye, seemed to watch the night. The silence was absolute, unnatural. There, in that Swedish clearing, the impossible had become physical. As the two men's minds struggled to process the scene, reality completely disintegrated. From the shadows around the object, four figures emerged. They didn't walk, they simply appeared. About 4 feet tall, their bodies were slender, a lead-gray color, almost blending into the gloom. And then they attacked. What followed was not a conventional fight. The creatures grabbed them with surprising firmness, trying to drag them towards the ship's ramp. It was then that Hans and Stig noticed the most terrifying feature of these beings. Their touch, according to their accounts, had the consistency of a block of ice. But it wasn't just the temperature. It was the bizarre, almost incomprehensible sensation that their hands could pass through the creature's skin, as if they were made of a dense, gelatinous matter. A swamp-like odor of decaying organic material emanated from them, completing the sensory assault. Hans, in an act of desperation, prepared to fight back, but before he could move a muscle, he felt a cold invasion of his mind. He had the clear and terrifying certainty that his thoughts had been read. The creatures knew his intention to attack and paralyzed him before he even began. Their physical strength wasn't overwhelming, but their coordination and their ability to anticipate every move turned any resistance into a futile act. The struggle, which felt like an eternity, lasted somewhere between 4 and 7 minutes. The four creatures, perceiving Hans as the greater threat, focused their efforts on him. In an act of pure instinct, Hans clung to a nearby campground sign, digging his feet into the ground, using that fragile metal pillar as an anchor to avoid being taken. Seeing his friend about to be subdued, Stig had a spark of inspiration born from panic. He broke free and ran back to the car, not to flee, but to fight with the only weapon he had. His hands found the horn, and a shrill, desperate sound tore through the supernatural silence of the clearing, a mundane, human sound of alarm. Through the windshield, he saw the surreal scene. Hans clinging to the post, being pulled by the gray creatures. The horn didn't stop, and the sound seemed to have an effect. Perhaps for fear of attracting attention, the creatures hesitated. For an instant, the attack ceased. They let go of Hans, who fell heavily to the ground, injured and exhausted. Stig ran to help him, and at that exact moment, the craft began to move. Its light intensified, becoming almost blinding. A trail of scent, a mix of ether and something burnt, filled the air. A sharp, intense, and physically painful sound emanated from the object as it ascended, piercing the men's ears. Along with the sound came vibrations, rapid and violent, that coursed through the ground in their bodies, completely paralyzing them for a few seconds.
When the light vanished into the sky and the sound faded, all that remained was the silence of the forest and two broken men. The adrenaline gave way to a state of profound hysteria. There on the dirty snow, Hans and Stig began to cry compulsively, a cry of terror, of relief, and of a confusion so overwhelming their brains couldn't process it. It took them 10 long minutes to even begin to compose themselves and get back to the car. The journey continued in a heavy, dense silence, each man lost in the labyrinth of his own mind, reliving the icy touch, the putrid smell, the piercing sound. The conversation only returned when the city lights appeared on the horizon, a beacon of normality in an ocean of madness. And there they made a pact. Never, under any circumstances, would they tell anyone what had happened. Who would believe them? They would be labeled as crazy, as liars, as drunks. The trauma was theirs, and they would carry it in secret. However, the body and mind do not forget. In the days that followed, Hans's abrasions and most notably the state of permanent tension in both of them were too obvious to go unnoticed. Their closest friends noticed. Something was wrong. Something dark they were hiding behind their eyes. The insistence was so great that finally the dam broke. They told their story. And the story, once freed, began a journey that would reach the highest echelons of the Swedish Ministry of Defense. What should have been an investigation to uncover the truth quickly turned into an effort to discredit the witnesses. On January 18th, an official statement was issued. Hans and Stig had been subjected to a 12-hour interrogation conducted by military personnel and police. The final report was a piece of psychological deconstruction. It pointed out that Stig had been discharged from military service years earlier for agoraphobia, an anxiety disorder. They described him as nervous, frightened, with vague answers. Hans, in turn, was described as someone who answered mechanically, as if following a memorized script. The implicit conclusion was clear. The story was the product of one man's unstable mind and the other's suggestibility. A classic case of mass hysteria and hallucination. The case seemed closed, but Kjell Roning, an investigative journalist, wasn't convinced. He discovered glaring flaws in the military's investigation. The Army psychologist barely understood the men's dialect. No soil samples were collected from the landing site. The only tape recorder the military brought to the interrogation was faulty. The report seemed to have been written before the investigation even began. And then, Roning discovered the most important piece of this puzzle. Before the military interrogation, Hans and Stig underwent two separate medical examinations.
In these exams, they were subjected to hypnoanalysis and, more crucially, the administration of sodium amobarbital, popularly known as truth serum. These were much more incisive procedures designed to bypass conscious deceit and access the truth of the experience. The result of these medical exams was the direct opposite of the military report. The doctors concluded that while there might be inaccuracies in the details such as the exact shape of the beings, the experience the two men lived through was not a product of their own minds. It was not a hallucination. The tests indicated that Hans and Stig genuinely believed they had lived every second of that attack. The military inquiry sought contradictions. The medical inquiry sought the truth. And the two truths were irreconcilable. The story of the Domsten case is split into two realities. On one side, the official report from a military institution suggesting panic and fantasy. On the other, the results of deep clinical analyses which point to a real experience, however impossible it may seem. Decades later, the mystery remains frozen in time, just like that winter morning in Sweden. What really happened in that clearing? We are left with echoes of a confrontation and an uncomfortable reminder that sometimes the truth is far stranger than any fiction. Is there one piece of this puzzle that, for you, is the key to it all? The fragility of a mind under panic? Or the coldness of a report that perhaps wanted to hide the unacceptable?